Emerald.
I got the 6.
Ah, go away. Da 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 da. Good to see you all again. Hope you had a good break. Relaxed, maybe enjoyed yourself a little bit. I hope. Okay, let's see what I can do today. I thought I was really off schedule, but I guess I'm on schedule. But I might be off by a week. Well, let's see if I can get violence done today. Not literally done, but finish the lecture. Let's see. Probably not, but oh well. So I'll still be off by a week. But anyways, if I have to cut some stuff out, that's fine. Because whatever I don't cover, I won't hold you to on a quiz. Please remember the quiz is due tomorrow, quiz number 2. So please get it done if you haven't. Appreciate that. All right. Let's get back to violence. All right. Maybe stop here. There we go. Talking about this guy. I think maybe I'm done with him. Am I done? Hope so. A little bit. Konrad Lorenz. Okay. As I was telling you, basically to summarize, his view was Miss Krauss. His view was that violence is biological. It's hardwired into our biology. And so I guess you could say it's something completely natural to us. It's completely normal. But as I told you, his views were very influential throughout the mid 20th century, around the 1950s and after. But they're now mostly rejected. Not sure why. But anyways, I'm not sure if it's because they've been proven wrong or because Lawrence was once a Nazi. And a sympathizer, or at least a Nazi sympathizer, and that kind of taints his work. It's possible, as I told you about that opera. With the opera, right? That guy who wrote an opera, that Miss Krauss. Did I mention the opera? Did I mention an opera? The guy who wrote the opera, and I found out he was a Nazi sympathizer. And no, I must have mentioned it in this class. Why would I have mentioned it? I haven't mentioned any real Nazis in my other classes. Christian faith, no. Conquering Sacred Writings, no Nazis, I don't think. It's the only class. No, anyways. All right. Well, anyways, there was I like listening to operas and music like that. I listened to a really beautiful, pretty little opera with a great message that I liked, but I found out that the composer was a Nazi sympathizer. And it just kind of soured the whole thing on me. I couldn't really. I listened to the opera, but then I found out, and I couldn't listen to it in the same way again. And I guess that's the same. That's the same for like Lawrence. He's tainted. He's burdened with his association with the Nazis and what happened in World War II, and so his views are just not. You don't want to touch them. I guess he's radioactive. But I don't. I'm mentioning. Why am I mentioning him? Because even people who do bad things can. That doesn't necessarily, in my view, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, the word I'm looking for is vitiate, but I have another word I'm looking for, simpler word than vitiate. That doesn't mean that their work was nonsense or that they didn't come to true conclusions or they didn't do legitimate work, and I think he did. Unless someone can show me otherwise, other experiments that have shown that aggression is not have biological resources. Other than just saying, well, the guy was a bad person. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There are a lot of people who are bad people. Ty Cobb, one of the greatest baseball players ever, but not a very good person. But they don't take him off the record books. All right. Well, autonomic. Some of these things you're going to know better than I am because I know some of you are in health sciences. So if I get anything wrong or say something dubious, then just shout out and correct me. I'm no expert in this and anatomy and stuff like that, but it has to be talked about. The autonomic nervous system and its relation to aggression. Okay, so we have the ideas of Lawrence, the ethology, that there are biological bases of behavior, which I think there are. You learn about that if you're doing psychology, right? You learn about how the genetics in the brain affect people's behavior. But we also have our nervous system, which is there has been some evidence that the arousal of the autonomic nervous system in our bodies plays a role in aggression. Okay, so there is some biological basis. Maybe also genetic, but as Lawrence seemed to think. But the what is the autonomic nervous system? Because you have this parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, here's a little picture to explain it. Basically, the autonomic nervous system controls unconscious functions. The Greek word autos means self, or by yourself. So by itself, it does these things. You don't have to control them yourself, like your heart beating and your lungs breathing. I mean, you can. I mean, there are techniques and stuff like that that people can use in yogic practices and certain meditational practices where they can actually affect their autonomic nervous system and make their heart beats more slowly and their breathing. They can, you can intervene and control your breathing. But typically these are unconscious things, Your stomach digests your food. You don't have to tell it to do that or how to do it. Your eyes see and send light information to your brain. Okay, they're doing it themselves. But also the stereotypical fight or flight reflex. I think they've revised it now so that it's either fight, flight, or does anyone know the third one that they add on now?
Freeze.
Freeze, yeah. You don't do anything. You can't do anything. So fight, flight, or freeze also might have seems to have some relation to our autonomic nervous system, that the body just reacts violently. Maybe. And it operates through the brain stem and the spinal cord. Yeah, brain stem and spinal. So yeah, and then you've got different types of the autonomic, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So the sympathetic is the fight or flight, I guess, that you have really no control over. But then this is when you're feeling, I guess your normal, the parasympathetic is your normal attitude, okay? Your muscles are relaxed, your heart is beating normally, or even it's more restfully, your blood vessels are dilated, which means they expand, so you have more blood flowing through your body with oxygen and stuff like that, and nutrients. Epinephrine, cortisol, norepinephrine. Don't know what those do. Does anyone know what cortisol does? Epinephrine? The epinephrine fans? Anybody?
Cortisol is the stress hormone.
It is? Stress? Okay, good. Good. Getting somewhere. Stress? That sounds right. So your stress is lowered. Huh?
Sympathetic. But more cortisol, you're like more stressed out. Like,
yeah, the parasympathetic is inhibiting it, so I'm assuming it makes you less stressed.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Is Lazarus, you know anything about epinephrine?
No.
Neither do I. Yes, Miss Polona? Epinephrine has to do with pain? I was thinking, isn't it? And like aspirin and stuff like that? Aspirin, epinephrine? Okay, so pain. All right. So, I lost you already. What are you eating there? What you got there? Ah. Ooh, cinnamon. Very nice. All right, so less pain. Or at least it's treating so you don't feel pain, I guess, if it's inhibiting it. the epinephrine. I guess, yeah, if you're in fight or flight mode, you want more epinephrine so it will not make you feel pain if you have to lash out, so maybe that's why you can do things like, I mean, normally you couldn't do, like, you have to run really fast or like you have to, I don't know, climb a tree to get away from a bear or something. And, you have to, it hurts. You can do things that hurt you. You have to climb the trunk of the tree. You can scratch your hands and stuff, but you don't feel the pain when you're doing it because you're pumped. Literally pumped, you're pumped full of epinephrine, I guess. Painkiller. Natural painkiller. All right, let's see what else have we got. Decreases cholesterol. Okay. All right. That's always good, I guess. But I know cholesterol is sticky, so I guess it allows the blood to flow better. Intestinal motility. I'm gonna just say how your intestines move. All right, whatever. So your intestines are pushing stuff through more easily in digesting your food. Serotonin. I know serotonin is important, but I forget what serotonin does. If anyone wants to tell me what serotonin is useful for, I'd appreciate it. Go ahead. Oh, it makes you feel happy. All right, so the happy hormone. Okay. And then stimulates reproductive functions. Ooh. So it makes you horny. Well, that's just another way it stimulates your reproductive. I don't know what to tell you, maybe we should have, maybe abstinence was the wrong way to go. Maybe we needed more exercise in high schools. Don't tell them abstinence. Forget about the condoms. Get them up and run in place. Get them stressed, fight or flight, Mr. Klitsch. And that way it will inhibit the reproductive thing. Keep them moving, keep them active. Okay. So then the fight or flight obviously opens up your eyes so more light comes in, tenses your muscles, accelerates your heartbeat, it beats faster, constricts your blood vessels so that there's less, the blood is moving more quickly through your blood vessels and reaching things more quickly. It secretes painkiller, cortisol, increases stress or your stress level or your appreciation that there's a stressful situation. Increases cholesterol. I don't know why. I'd have to look that up and find out why cholesterol is important to fight or flight. Shuts down, basically, or limits your other processes like digesting food, which are maybe not so necessary as other things are. Decreases your happiness factor. So you recognize the danger, I guess. I'm assuming that's why it does it. So you're not like, oh, zombies. Happy. No, you're like, zombies. You know to run. And then, of course, makes you not want to think about sex because, sex can always come later, but you got to get away from the zombies first. Then we can have, like the lucky. Anyways. The autonomic nervous system. All right. The autonomic nervous system functions the same regardless of the emotion inducing it. Why is that important? Well, I'll find out in a second, I guess. So, it doesn't distinguish the autonomic nervous system. I guess the point is that it reacts regardless of whether, I guess if it's a bad, something bad, you're going to do violence or you're going to do something good. You're doing something good, fight or flight, with the sympathetic nervous system, I guess that would come into play a lot in sports, I think, where guys, you get really, emotional and stuff like that. You're not relaxed. You're under the stress of the situation in the sports, which is, fine. But if it's a fight or flight thing where you're in war, you're in a battle and you're shooting and being shot at, that's not so good as if you're just playing, a baseball game or a football game. But it doesn't matter what kind of, I think that's the point. It doesn't matter what quality of thing is going on, like whether you're in a sporting event or you're in a war zone, the autonomic system is aroused in exactly the same way, no matter whether the emotion is good or bad. So pre-existing arousal from any cause can augment or grow your emotional arousal of the current situation and the intensity of the resulting behavior. What that's saying is another way to put that is that if your autonomic nervous system becomes aroused already, is already in a state of arousal, then your response can also be can also increase. So when someone responds aggressively to something, the response to it will be more intense if there's arousal of the autonomic system through fear or anger, sexual attraction, physical exertion of some kind. Okay? So if you're already angry, and maybe, I know this with myself. I have to be careful, with my family members because sometimes, the mood changes and I'm angry about something. And maybe you know this, it's probably not the right time to respond to somebody, especially if they're being annoying. Maybe not being nasty or trying to hurt you, but they're bothering you or doing something annoying and you're already angry about something. Okay, so your autonomic nervous system is already aroused to some extent because you're feeling this emotion of anger. And so my response to that person might be out of whack, might be more intense to them than it should be. I'm overreacting, as we say, because of that. I'm angry or I'm afraid. People do things when they're afraid that they might not potentially do if they're feeling okay, And of course, sexual attraction is a big one. Okay. I'm trying to think of an example, but of either fear or sexual attraction. Physical exertion, I say, look, if you're playing a sport or something and you're already in that, well, think of it this way, like we talked about mixed martial arts and stuff. When guys, or a boxing match or something, you got to cool down. Okay. You've aroused yourself. You've aroused your autonomic nervous system to the point of what you're doing, which is giving pain and receiving pain, and that's there. You're under that stress and that pressure. So, if you're put into a stressful situation, as soon as you come out of the octagon, how is your autonomic nervous system more likely to respond if it hasn't had time to kind of cool off? I think this is also another example that just pops into my head is like method acting. Anyone who's acted or been in plays or stuff in high school or something like that. If you've ever heard of method acting, where an actor tries to really get into the character. You don't just create the character; you become the character. You've heard stories about this about certain actors and actresses that even after the cameras are off, they're still portraying the character. They're in character all the time, which can be really annoying to other actors and actresses and directors and can drive people crazy. It's like, I don't know, it's Leonardo DiCaprio, but he's playing a character named Jim. You always have to call him Jim. It's like, Leonardo, you're not Jim. You're not the character. I want to be called Jim all the time until the movie's over. It's like in the moment, method acting. That can be, I think, a thing where and for me, and I'm not a shrink or anything, but I wonder if that's not the cause of so many mental illness that you find in, like the entertainment industry, people getting into drugs and alcohol and just feeling bad because if you create a character, it's like a mask, like a persona. You can take the mask off. You create the character, but then when you're done portraying the character, it's not you, you put it away. But in method acting, the whole theory of this type of acting is you try to become the character as much as possible. So if you're like, some hateful, belligerent, racist, violent person. You really have to become that for your character, so your character will ring true. Okay? And a lot of times when you see people acting in this way, like really acting, they're professionals and stuff, it makes them great actors. It does make their characters ring true, but once the director says cut, it can be hard for them to turn off the emotions, you know? Especially if they're really extreme emotions like anger or sadness, like the scene where you have to cry, or be under intense stress. It can be your body doesn't know the difference. As I said, what did I just say? Autonomic arousal is the same in quality, regardless of the emotion. Your body doesn't know that you're an actor or an actress in a movie or a play. So you're subjecting it to these emotions, to creating it artificially to come into play, these certain changes in your body to come into play. So the biological basis for aggravation can be found somewhat in psychopathological aggression. Psychopathology is basically mental illness. Okay? Getting back to serotonin, Ms. Colonna, it's a neurotransmitter, so I guess that means it transmits things. I mean, your nerves don't really connect up. They have little tendrils or whatever. It's like fingers, you might say, that touch each other, and things transmit across them. So I don't know how that works, but whatever. I didn't design it. You did, sir. Anyways. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and it's more common in, what's the word I'm looking for? Increased levels of serotonin are found in those who have been diagnosed with impulsive aggression. Okay, people who don't have aggression control. All right, they punch, people who punch and hit and slap and scream and yell and do all sorts of violent things. Maybe, but impulsively. They're not necessarily trying to do it. Maybe you've seen the commercials. Have you seen these drug commercials? There's now a drug commercial out there for Alzheimer's. But like, my mom had Alzheimer's, which is bad enough. But then somewhere along the line, she started becoming violent. Hitting, slapping. You ever seen these commercials? No? Well, don't watch TV. Enough TV, I should say. All right. Or the right kind of TV. What, you don't get any commercials on your, where you just mute them or something? Or? Huh? You don't pay attention? Okay. I try not to. I usually mute them, but anyway, so they have these commercials out there. Mom, was already, mom was kind of losing her mind a little bit from Alzheimer's. But then this develops. She starts hitting you and slapping and yelling. And so now they've got another drug to give mom with her other drugs for Alzheimer's that will kind of calm her down. Okay? So she's not doing it. It's part of the symptoms of the mental illness, which is dementia. All right? That arises. That as your brain is breaking down, it's not just, your memory apparently, but your ability to control your impulses. You might want to punch somebody in the face because you're angry, but, you don't. Because, it's, for whatever reason, it's not the right time. You get fired from your job. You get sued. Jesus says, love your enemy, whatever. But some people can't do that. And that's apparently tied to increases in serotonin. But it's not clear in these cases that it's aggressiveness in particular that's the problem, or the aggressiveness is just the problem is really the reduced impulse control that serotonin might be messing with. That if there's it's a deficit, a deficit. I skipped over that word. If you have less serotonin, the happy hormone. Okay, so if you have less serotonin produced by your brain, then it's more likely that you're going to have impulsive aggression. But my point is that it's not clear whether the deficit of serotonin is affecting the aggression. The aggression is being caused by this deficit, this lack of the happy hormone, or it's the impulse control, which is letting the aggression out. Why is it always negative stuff, though? When it comes to mental stuff, you ever wonder about that? Why is it not like people have impulsive aggression, but people have impulsive hug giving? Impulsive patting on the head is Haran. You know, there's never that. It's always like impulsive swearing, you know, hitting, screaming. The amygdala, you know? Yeah, it sucks up bad memories, but then it holds on to them and releases them every now and then, you know, and causes trauma. So its purpose is to, like, if you're really going through a traumatic event, to kind of suck up all the badness of that event, that traumatic event, so you can deal with it. But it holds on, it never lets it go. And then it releases it 10 years later. And that's why people have post-traumatic stress disorder. But really what's going on is you're reliving that moment of the original stress. It feels like it's happening right then, the trauma. It's happening again right then and there. Well, that's your amygdala. Why would it do that? That seems to cause more trouble than the original letting the person experience the trauma with no help. I'd rather have that than have my amygdala constantly firing off 10, 20 years later, causing me like PTSD for the rest of my life. Doesn't it know that trauma has passed? No. These are just things I think about. How is it being helpful? Seems to be causing more problems. All right. The nervous system, okay, can be connected to aggression. So can gender or sex, which are kind of two sides of the same coin. Whether you're male or female, how do you know? How do you tell? Well, am I taping this? All right. Any future lawsuits? I don't want to. Well, I'm not a biologist, but I've read some biology on this, so I know, because I know I'm not an expert. But apparently, female is something that produces anything that produces eggs, ova, and a male, quote unquote, male of a species is what produces sperm. So it's based on basically the gametes that you produce. There are some creatures that produce both of them themselves, and they basically impregnate themselves. But mammals like us, human beings and other mammals, do not do this. You have one part of the species which produces eggs, which are whatchamacallit, then fertilized by the sexual gametes of the other that we call sperm. And so we have words for that called female and male, et cetera, and so forth. That's as much as I'm going to say about that because I want to get fired. Okay. The single best predictor of aggression in an adult is the level of aggressiveness in childhood. All right. Where did I get this from? The Dictionary of Anthropology. Yes, and it's article on aggression by Joel Wallman, in case you're wondering. So, I mean, okay, yeah, I guess, yeah, I think that's obvious. I don't think you need a PhD in anything to not notice that. You just need to be a parent or just some observant person. You know, if a little kid is having real problems handling something, whatever it is, not just aggression, but, you know, the kid can't read or has difficulty putting words together and stuff, or speaking, you know, stuff like that. You know, there's going to, you know, it's not going to go away magically when they become an adult. It's probably still going to be there. So if a child is particularly aggressive, overly aggressive, more aggressive than you would expect to be the norm, that's probably a good predictor that he or she will be an aggressive adult. Doesn't mean that they'll be that way. It's not, you know, not set in stone, but it's a predictor. But the question is, where does it come from to begin with? Why is this child more aggressive than one would expect a human being to be? Where does that come from? That's another question. So sex slash gender is the most powerful biological factor in determining aggression throughout the life cycle, okay, that you can use. And so I have a picture there of a little boy screaming at a little girl, being aggressive. And because aggressiveness is one of those things that seems to distinguish males, quote unquote, males from females in our species. It's one of the most consistently found differences between males and females in ethnographic research, meaning, when anthropologists go and study cultures, okay, how females treat aggressiveness and how males treat it is something that distinguishes their groups. Males exhibit greater aggressiveness at every stage of life. When they're little, when they're in puberty, when they're, young adults, when they're old, middle age, when they're older, they're always more aggressive than females. Males are especially aggressive during puberty and after. I guess that makes sense because, you've got all sorts of new hormones that are flowing through the body and the body's going through all types of changes. And so, yeah, I guess I would assume that it would tend to exacerbate other things that are there, like aggressiveness during puberty. Hopefully it levels off, you know. But I mean, maybe you've heard these things, Mr. Dobson, The boy needs sports. Get the boy on the football team. Get the boy, get playing lacrosse or something, Because you notice, the parents notice that there's this aggressiveness there. So kid needs an outlet for the energy. Got too much energy, Put a helmet on him. Put a hockey stick in his hand. Get him out there and let him beat people up. That's what he wants to do. And usually this is around puberty time, Hopefully the kid gets out of it, but maybe the kid's really good at it. He becomes a pro and then. However, Wallman, who wrote this article for the Dictionary of Anthropology, Joel Wallman, isn't sure if this aggressiveness he's not sure how much of it is due to physicality, the physical nature, meaning the XY chromosome or genotype or the XX. Does that play a role? If it's an XY, which we would usually define as a male, does that somehow affect the aggressiveness factor? Whereas if you have that X rather than a Y, meaning you're female, that you have less aggression? Is that it? Or is it cultural, which he would define more as gender? Sex is more the biology and gender is more the culture. Are the cultural roles to blame, or are they the basis for it? That men are just expected in the culture to be more violent and more aggressive, whereas women are meant to be quieter, more passive and placid and gentle and meek. Could be. Don't know. But it could also be both. It could be the culture is building off of the biological that as I said, the boy needs to play football or something. You notice the guys are more aggressive. So the culture gives them ways to maybe filter that, like you see it with little boys on the playground, girls and boys on the playground. Watch them, The boys are very active, pushing and running and doing stuff. Usually from what I've seen, the girls are standing around talking to each other. Okay, there's not that much movement and stuff like that. They might be slapping each other, but those are usually the little hand games that they're doing, slaps and I don't know. Or jumping rope or something. They're not usually yelling or screaming at each other, where the boys, from my experience, usually are. They're yelling. Girls aren't necessarily screaming. So maybe it is biological, but then the culture sees that, people see that, and they find roles for that within their different cultures, whatever it might be. I don't know. I'm just spitballing, Mr. Bracy. Okay, so that's the organic bases, Ms. Krause. The organic, the brain, the physical, the material. Where could aggression come from our bodies, our brains, our nerves, our genes? But then there's the functional, as any of you who study psychology know. You want to look at the organic, see if there's some damage to the organ system that's causing the illness, the mental illness. But then there are functions, how people are taught to deal with their emotions and respond to things. If you grew up with parents who are always putting stuff off until tomorrow, I don't want to do it now, I'm tired, do it tomorrow, and you find out as an adult that you also procrastinate and very much, that's functional. That's a function. You've learned that habit. You've learned that habit. So what are functional bases? Your home environment, as I just kind of mentioned with your parents, okay? Your, parental discipline, how your parents decide to discipline you, usually correlates with levels of aggression in later life, If you got, happy, everyone's smiling, everyone's around the table and, you're well fed and, grandma's there with mom and your extended family and blah, 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 and you're all smiling and stuff. All right, that seems to be conducive to less aggression. You don't seem to have much to be angry about. However, if, you got a family that you hate and they seem to hate you, all they do is yell at you, or they're full of criticism, or they don't seem to care about you, that can correlate to a higher level of aggression in later life. If the discipline you receive is overly harsh or brutal, that can be a risk factor for aggressiveness. Or if it's erratic, like, parent doesn't at one point doesn't care, lets you do what you want, but then you do something else and the parent brings down the hammer, like, whips you with a strap or something. It's overboard. On the one hand, the parent does nothing, and then it's erratic. The parent flips out and beats the kid up for doing something. That also can be a risk factor for aggressiveness. So harsh and erratic discipline, but then also lax discipline, because the parent doesn't seem to care about what the kid does. There's no discipline at all. The kid is acting out whatever he or she wants to, can be an indicator for aggressiveness. So what, anthropologists call, or I guess also sociologists and psychologists call, harsh socialization. If the child is socialized, and this really happens first with the family, I think with all of us, if the socialization does not go well, almost certainly you're not going to have a gentler adult. You're going to have a more aggressive adult. Parents can do a lot of damage. So, I think, they're human beings and they will do damage. You're human beings, you're going to make mistakes. You just don't want to do so much damage that you produce a really damaged other human being. Because the children can reflect the parents. A lot of times they do, I guess is the point they're saying. If you have aggressive parents and violent parents, then it's likely the kid is going to be violent too. Or at least not know how to handle it. You might have like kids that curl up into a ball whenever they have any kind of stressor in their life. They can't, because that's how they had to react to their home environment. They didn't react, they didn't lash out. They instead built up the walls and kind of took themselves inside of themselves to not deal with the harshness of their situation. Okay. Now we have what's called the frustration aggression hypothesis, FAH, the frustration aggression hypothesis, which also can be called the unpleasant mood states. The unpleasant mood states. Yes. All right. This is a modern account of aggression. The hypothesis derives from the 1940s from this book that you see here on the PowerPoint. That was formulated by a group of Yale psychologists, Yale University, led by John Dollard. Where is he? John Ballard. Okay, these are his colleagues. This book came out in 1939. Frustration and Aggression. And what did they argue? They argued that aggravation or aggressiveness results when a person's goals are blocked. Something that I want is taken from me or made difficult for me to achieve, and so I become aggressive. Okay, so that was, they wrote a whole book just to tell you that theory that I told you in like 10 seconds. Anyways, but they had to prove it, of course, so show why they thought it was true. The theory, the hypothesis has been revised since then. They recognize that people who believe in the frustration aggression hypothesis recognize that aggressiveness, I want to say aggravation, but excuse me, aggressiveness, Mr. Park, is only one possible response, okay? There are other possible responses. It's only one possible response. So I guess they don't want to put their eggs all in one basket. And aggression can be reduced or diminished by certain practices. For example, vigorous exercise. So if you go to an exercise class, you're feeling pissed off, and you go to your exercise class, apparently that's going to help reduce your aggression. Well, I would imagine so. Anything that's going to tire you out, yeah, I'd like to tear his head off, but I'm just so darn tired. I guess. All right, that makes sense to me. All right, so that's how they've kind of revised it. So I guess they're trying to say it's not set in stone that if your goals are blocked, you'll necessarily become aggressive. It's one of your options, and you can change, basically. They always want to give you, whenever they close a door, they want to open a window. You know what I'm saying? They always want to give you they don't want just to tell you, no, you can't do it. You can't change ever. You can't teach an old dog or a new dog new tricks. So in this theory, aggression is retaliatory. It comes directly as retaliation for the object of your frustration. You want something, okay? Think of like a love triangle. Person A is desired by person B, but also is desired by person C. So now person C and person B don't like each other very much. And maybe, person B to show, I don't know, his or her affection for person A, or just to get person C out of the way so he or she is not frustrating the person's, access to the desired object, person, beats up the other person or tries to kill the other person. Because if I can't have her, nobody can have her, Ms. Durant, right? Or him, whatever. So you get rid of the third wheel, one might say. So it's just you on your bicycle built for two. It's too glitchy. You usually don't see a bicycle built for three, do you, Ms. Lazarus? It's usually a bicycle built for two. So what are you going to do with the third person? Throw them overboard, get rid of them. So that's you're frustrated. I want this person, but this other person is now in competition with me. This will kind of come back with Rene Girard, I guess, when we start talking about him and his ideas about the scapegoating and that, violence is mimetic. It's imitative, imitative. We're imitating, whatever someone wants, another person wants, that thing must be valuable. And I see that. I see that person wants it, right, Mr. Klitsch? So that thing must be valuable, okay? Therefore, I should want it too, right? Right? I'm imitating that person. I should want it too because it's valuable. But now we have a conflict because there's one thing, but there's two of us or more who now want it. And it can't be had by all of us. So violence, what do? Aggression. person up or kill them. Do whatever you need to do to get to that thing before the other person. You've seen this, right, Mr. Lynch? You've seen those? Have you seen the videos recently on the news and stuff of like people stealing baseballs from little kids, or Patrick Mahomes gave his sweatband or some little kid, some lady ripped it out of his hand, yeah, and put out some video where she's like bragging about it. That's the object, okay? Patrick Mahomes sweatband or a home run ball. I want that. Oh, hey, I see all these people are running all over there to get this ball, Mr. Dobson. It must be worth something. So I want it too. Mimetic, I'm imitating. But there's like 5 of us, and there's just one ball that's coming down. So what do you see people do? Grabbing this, pushing people out of the way, trying to get at it. Violence, aggressiveness. You are frustrating me. You are in my way. I want that Cabbage Patch doll, Mr. Henry. You ain't gonna get it. If there's one left on the shelf, and there are 3 or 4 people, and we're all coming for it. You're frustrating me. Get out the way. Get out the way, out the way. Frustration. But what do you do? But that's when there are other people involved. What happens when you don't have a source of frustration? I mean, you're frustrated, but what can you do when there's no response is really possible to a source of frustration? For example, say the source of frustration is more powerful than I am, or it's not even a person, like a natural disaster. We were supposed to have this big nor'easter a few days. Remember, did you see this on the weather? Yeah, it's all over that. Everything has to be hystericized. Everything has to be like the ultimate, because they want to get people. I don't know. I shouldn't say that because I don't know what their motives are. But it's like everything's a major storm, Major storm breaking. 1 foot of snow. 1 foot of snow. Like, ooh. At first I'm like, ooh, really? A major storm's coming? We can expect 1 foot of snow. Really? Okay. Everything's a major storm. Everything's a major update. Everything's breaking news. Even though I've seen it on the local news like an hour before, but on the national news, it's just breaking news. And they gotta have some standards. If it appeared an hour before, I don't think you should be able to call it breaking news. I'm just saying. I don't think they should be allowed to call it that. But anyways, I'm watching the news, the national news. On comes, what's his name, David Muir. Major storm coming on the northeast. A nor'easter is coming from North Carolina all the way up to Massachusetts. There's going to be these rain and wind and I'm like, oh, okay. The weekend comes when it was supposed to be, and it's like, oh, there was rain in the air. There's some rain, some drizzle, and it was a little windy. And some tree, of course, they always find some tree somewhere fell down. Somewhere, some tree, of course, some tree has fallen down somewhere in this country. It's a huge country. Some trees fallen. And a tree fell on a house. Maryland. Okay. So that big nor'easter. Okay, fine. Let's say we had a big natural disaster. Hurricane, earthquake, something like that around this area. Well, you're frustrated. How do you retaliate? That's a good question. Well, blame God, right? Usually people blame God for stuff like that. I think. You have no control. It's a nameless, faceless thing. So you blame. That is where we're getting also into Girard's idea of scapegoating. You find a group or a person that you can then take out your aggression on. I can't do anything, well, we couldn't do anything about COVID, right? It was out there. Ultimately, what can we do about it? Yeah, you could take a vaccine, but you could still get it, right? And you could still die even if you got it, even with a vaccine, if you were a certain age type or something, whatever. But in the end, what really happened? I mean, like with any virus or, like the flu or anything, was a form of the flu, it just it burns through a population, right? It kills as many people as are going to be killed. It infects as many as is going to be infected. And then we adapt. Our bodies, we're never really immune to anything, but we have some kind of immunity, or we're not as likely to get that disease anymore. Which is a scary thought, right? Because it really reminds you how out of control we are. Especially if it were something really nasty, like Ebola, or something really got out that was some chemical weapon or something where there really was, developed no cure for it. Well, they probably have a cure somewhere. And they have to, I would hope. I would hope they would develop a cure. But yeah, what do you think chemical weapons are doing? They're working on ways to manipulate the flu virus or other viruses and stuff to make them more lethal, not to make them impregnable, not to make them go away, not to find a cure for them. That's why they're weapons, right? Well, I mean, used as weapons, if need be. If need be, not that we'll ever use them, but it's good to have them. What if they get out? Okay. So we're out of control. What are you gonna do? Well, do the same thing that people did in the Middle Ages when you had plagues and stuff like that. You freak out. You blame the Jews, for example. The Jews poisoned the wells. The Jews, it must have been the Jews, right, Ms. Moon? Because Ms. Krause, they're Jews, right? They're not one of us. They're not Christians, or they're not truly French, or they're not truly Italian. So it must be the Jews. All right, so if we vent our frustrations on them. We tell the Jews they all have to live in one part of the village so they won't infect us, or so we know where they are so they can't poison our well water anymore and make us all get the plague or some kind of disease or something. Or we kill them. We get revenge, My mom died from the plague because you Jews did this, So I go kill a Jew to even up the score. And I'm just using the Jews because it's a very, it's well-known example from European history. But you can do it to other groups as well. When I was living in Papua New Guinea for 9 months, it was witches. Witches. If someone in your family got sick and got cancer, people didn't know why people got cancer. So it must have been some spell concocted by a witch. So you got to find the witch in the village and kill her. I don't know how that solved the person's cancer problem, but made you feel good. Got out your frustration. Someone was brought to justice. So that still goes on even today in certain areas of the world. If you travel, you stay here, you might not encounter it, but well, we do kind of have this some ways. We have certain groups that we blame for stuff. I mean, I'm not trying to preach or anything, but just to get, I said enough. I've given you enough examples. But this is what's going on. Aggravation. If you know who's frustrating you, then you can go after them. But if you don't know who's frustrating you, you can still find a them group to go after. You know what I'm saying? Okay. This theory, the frustration aggression hypothesis, used to be a popular theory. But, it too has been criticized. People think it's too broad. It's too broad of an idea to really be of any good in defining anything. So, for example, you have critics of it. Maybe I have their pictures here. Anyways. Oh, okay. Wait a second. Ah. Oh, okay. I forgot I had this. All right, here's just a little picture showing how it works. Okay? You have the drive to the goal, the thing that gets in the way. The thing that gets in the way is causes your frustration, and the frustration leads to aggression to try and get the obstacle out of the way, obviously. Okay? And there are, two ways this can go. You can be punished for your aggression if it's considered inappropriate, okay? Like killing another person because you're, in a love triangle and one person kills the opponent, the other person who's in love with the same person. Well, then you'll be punished. You'll go to jail for that aggression. Probably, I would assume. Maybe. But then there's ones where you're successful. It's catharsis. It's cathartic. It's a release. That's what catharsis basically is. Okay, the frustration is now released. It's resolved. Because the obstacle is removed successfully. Okay? So, for example, Osama bin Laden. You probably all don't remember him.
You said don't?
Huh?
You said don't?
I'm assuming, because no one seems to know any of my references. Do you remember Osama bin Laden? All right. What did he do? He supposedly did 9/11. Okay. Supposedly. There's still a question mark? Me? You. You think it was an inside job?
The truther? No, just playing.
No, that's okay. Yeah, there are some people who don't believe that he planned it at all. Okay, that's fine. I mean, I don't agree with it, but that's fine. We'll have their theories. Nevertheless, our government at least thought he did it. He masterminded. He came up with the plan or the idea. I don't even know if he actually drew up the plans. I think maybe he just came up with the idea, like, hey, let's do some massive terrorist attack on the United States. I don't even know if it went any farther than that. But anyways. But they had video of him saying it. Happy about it, taking credit. Of course, I gotta tell you, I happen to speak Arabic, so I have no idea verifying what he said was true, because the videos were all translated for us by the government. So I'm assuming that the government wouldn't lie. They would give me an accurate translation. I'm assuming. Okay, Osama bin Laden. Well, you guys were alive during President Obama's presidency. So you probably remember, or at least have some memory, when they caught Obama, they found him and they shot him, right? Oh, Obama. Osama. Well, look, Obama, Osama, where my mind's. Osama bin Laden. You remember that? You ever remember seeing that on the news when they found him? I think it was in Pakistan, living there all the time, out in the open. I don't know how they didn't know, but anyways, they sent in a Navy SEAL team. Well, actually, they weren't even Navy, they were sent in CIA. But they sent their later Navy SEALs. Were sent in by the CIA. And they found him and they shot him, yes? Does anyone remember this? Huh? No? You said, see, Mr. Saunders, that's why I'm like, Did you just remember? All right. Big celebration, success. There was catharsis. Obama got Osama bin Laden. It was a catharsis, a release of the frustration. Because we were frustrated as a nation. Because I remember living through it. Mentioning, where's Osama? Why couldn't George W. Bush? That was one of the stains on his administration. Couldn't find Osama. Couldn't get bin Laden. But Obama did, And the Democrats did a little conga line when he did. Hey, our guy got him. But the Republicans guy didn't get him. Okay? Catharsis. So success. And what's this? This is a revision. I guess taking into account the changes. You got frustration, the arousal leading to aggressiveness. Okay. So there can be aggressive cues. There can be no aggressive cues. This is Leonard Berkowitz's idea, modification of this. So basically what he's saying is you might be in a state of frustration. And me, I've been like this. I'd be like, well, are you pissed off? Yeah, I'm pissed off. Are you going to do anything about it? Oh, no. No, I'm pissed off. I don't like the situation, whatever situation it might be. I'm frustrated. But there are no aggressive cues for me. No one's like, there's nothing for me to do except accept the situation, maybe. So nothing happens. No aggressive cues. But then someone's like, oh, you pissed off? Yeah, I'm pissed off by this. And you're frustrated? Yeah, I'm frustrated. So what are you going to do about it? I don't know. Probably nothing. Well, what if you had this baseball bat? There's an aggressive cue. Makes it more likelihood. Well, it's a baseball bat. It's got to be used. That's good for something to get out my aggression. The local Target, or I don't know, someone on the street that I might want to beat up. One wearing a MAGA hat or something. Right? People being okay. I'm not saying beat people up with a MAGA hat. I'm just saying that's what we're getting into this whole thing where tribes are beating each other up. Like, give me a break. Not that it hasn't been happening before. It's happened before in our country's history. So it's no big surprise. Anyway, so this hypothesis has been challenged, all right? American psychologist Abraham Maslow, for example, thinks that, if there are legitimate interferences do not necessarily produce frustration. Okay, well, what's that mean? That's a fancy way of saying that, if the thing frustrating you, let's go back to this, if the obstacle is legitimate, then it doesn't necessarily lead to frustration just because there's an obstacle. Okay? Maybe a purely legitimate, just, if there's a traffic stop, traffic is stopped on the road because there's an accident ahead. Okay? Some people might be frustrated. I'm annoyed. I'm annoyed, I guess. I'm mildly frustrated sometimes. Sometimes I am really frustrated, but I recognize that there's nothing I can do. But also I understand the legitimacy of it, especially if somebody's hurt, If it's just, a person has a flat tire or something, or the car broke down, then I'm probably more frustrated because I don't see it as legitimate. It's like, get the car off the road. Move the car over and open a lane, please. Because I don't see it as legitimate. But if I see ambulances and fire trucks ahead, and people on stretchers, I'm like, oh, wait a second. There's something bad going on up there. So it legitimates it for me. So I'm not that frustrated. I'm more sympathetic. I hope nobody's hurt. So that's what Abraham Maslow was pointing out, that, it depends on how someone perceives the obstacle. The obstacle is a legitimate one, then they might not be frustrated at all. But if it's illegitimate, like they're working on the road during rush hour, and it's like, can't you dudes, you're union, you're still going to get paid time and a half or 2 times because you're doing it at night. Couldn't you do it at night, when less people are on the road? No, you got to pave stuff like 7 a.m. in the morning when everybody's here. I don't see that as legitimate. Maybe it is legitimate. Maybe one of the workers could explain to me, well, we've got this to do and that to do and the other to do, so this is the only time you could do it. Oh, okay. That's legitimate. So I might still be pissed off, but I'm not as pissed off. So the interference of the object that, well, the thing that's in the way, if it's unfair or something like that, that can make me frustrated. And research has indicated that aggressive behavior is a prevalent response to what's seen as deliberate or unfair interference with the attainment of my goal. All right. So, yeah, people think that, well, I'm not justifying this, but think of January 6th. How did a rally turn into a riot? How did people go from, waving American flags to smashing them through the windows of the Congress building? Yes, the Capitol building. Because they weren't doing that before. Before that, they were all hanging around and listening to speeches and stuff like that. And within, a period of time, where the Congress is at that time deciding, reading the votes of the election of the Electoral College. Just going through the process, and they challenge the vote. That happens all the time. That's part of the Constitution. Every election we have, they usually don't show it on TV because nothing comes of it. You know who won the election. But, you get one representative, and with a Senate, they get not support from a senator. You need a senator's support. And you can present a challenge, and then they go into debate to debate why should there be a challenge. And okay, everyone speaks their piece, and usually they say, well, there's nothing wrong with the electoral vote. It's what the results were, so goes into that hat. That's just going on, but it's interrupted because it was interrupted, yes, January 6th a few years ago, because people started rioting, started fighting and smashing things because they thought, I think they thought, some of them, I don't know all of them because I wasn't there. I wasn't there. But I don't know if they can still, well, I don't know if I can still get arrested if I were there. Who knows? Under Biden, yes. Under Trump, probably not. I'd probably get a medal. No, but I mean, they thought what was going on there was unfair. They stole the election. I'm not saying that Biden stole the election, but that was what I heard people saying. So they thought the process that was going on in the Capitol building was unfair. So maybe I'm not using this to justify the actions, but maybe to understand how then the aggression could come out because you're face to face, not really face to face because the congressmen and senators were all in the building. They didn't see them, but you're kind of face to face with the injustice of what's going on. And so you're aggressive, even violent. It's interfering with your goal attainment. You wanted someone else to win, but you think that was taken away from you, and now they're rubbing it in your face. They're counting it out in front of you. Well, not in front. You know what I'm saying? Take it from another perspective. From a number of years ago, Black Lives Matter. Remember that? Does anyone remember? Good. Thank God. It all happened. Well, I mean, there were a number of, probably, I think it was a whole bunch of events, but it was a George Floyd, right? A black man was arrested and cops not sat on him, but knelt down on his back or his neck or something so that he couldn't breathe, and he choked to death or he asphyxiated. There might have been other contributing factors, but nevertheless, the guy couldn't breathe. So it doesn't matter whether you're an older guy, younger guy, whatever, the guy he'd been doing before. If you take away someone's breath, they're going to probably suffocate. Anyways, and there was a sense of privilege. The guy was almost proud of it. He's looking at the camera. He's like, yeah. So almost like it was a trophy or something. And people freaked out. And people protested, but some of those protests became aggressive, yes, even violent. I think for the same reason as in this what Maslow was saying, and the frustration hypothesis, this built up frustration of the unfairness of what was going on and had been going on. And so it made aggressive behavior more likely. Again, I'm not justifying it. I'm just trying to understand it. I'm saying, Mr. Dobson, I want to understand it, where it might come from, why it's going on. doesn't mean, you have this whole problem with, the whole Gaza war, which thankfully, hopefully, is coming to an end soon or whatever. But I saw people on television who and on college campuses, this was a big issue. You couldn't say anything not in favor, but in defense of the Palestinians because people thought you were there by defending the terrorism, right? Which I'm not, and I wouldn't. Terrorism is terrorism. Taking hostages is hostages. They're awful crimes. But people were trying to understand why people would do that. But you get sometimes in situations where people, they don't look at you in good faith and assume that, okay, you're not trying to justify at all evil actions, but I want to understand why someone might do this evil action. Not all taking hostages and murdering people. No, I'm not, And the same thing goes for the Israelis. I'm not justifying dropping bombs on tens of thousands of Palestinians or killing a bunch of thousands of Palestinians or trying to move them out of the area or whatever. But I do want to understand it. To understand it, you got to talk about it. You got to think about it. When you don't let people talk or think about it, you say, well, you're an anti-Semite. You're defending Hamas. No, some people were. Let's be honest about that. Or you're siding with Israel against oppression, the oppressor. No, I want to understand why they're reacting. I want to understand. But of course, if I were in Gaza and I were getting, bombs dropped on me, I probably wouldn't have that luxury. Or if I'm an Israeli and I always have to live, go into the bomb shelter every couple of weeks because Hamas is throwing, sending rockets into my neighborhood, I might not have that luxury to think about these things too much. I might, my aggressive, I'm aroused. I'm getting that, Mr. Klitsch? My system's aroused always. So my response is simply aggressive, protective. All right. Okay. I'll see you next week. On that note, have a good day, good weekend.